Members, we are back in committee stage for the fast track approvals bill, and the question is that part 1 stand part. Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Chair. Now, I want to clarify a couple of things with you, Madam Chair, before we really get into this, and that is, of course, we've now had that ruling from the Speaker, so Schedule 2 is in Part 1, so yes. We will want to be discussing those projects, probably project by project, and we are also very interested in going through every clause of this bill. Now, of course, that Schedule 2, as we've just heard, has not gone to Select Committee. So this is our only opportunity to scrutinise the projects contained in that. So we will want to spend some time going through it. But I do want to start on Clause 3 before we get to the schedule. Because Clause 3 is the most important clause in this piece of legislation. It is the purpose clause. And why it's so important is because of the mechanics of the rest of the bill, and particularly in the schedules further on that will be in the Part 2 debate. And that is because when decision makers are making decisions on any approval, they have to give greatest weight to this purpose clause. So it's very important that we look at what the purpose clause says. And that is that the Act is to facilitate the delivery of infrastructure and development projects with significant regional or national benefits. And you will note, Madam Chair, that unlike other resource management or conservation legislation, there is no reference to anything to do with the environment. There is no reference here to sustainable development. And we know, Madam Chair, we have the supplementary analysis that in fact officials recommended that there should be such a reference. And this goes to the heart of why we on this side thought that those private projects in Schedule 2 should have been ruled out. Because this purpose is totally different from all the other environmental legislation, and because this purpose has the greatest weight, that means that the projects listed get a benefit that normal applicants do not get. And that benefit is to pollute, and it is a disgrace. Now, my question to the Minister is if he will consider an amendment in my name at number 129, and that is that the purpose is amended on a number of fronts. To read, the purpose of this Act is to facilitate the delivery of public infrastructure, housing or aquaculture with significant regional or national benefits, while continuing to promote the sustainable management of natural and physical resources for current and future generations. Now, Madam Speaker, that change to the purpose does a number of things, and it was reflected in a number of submissions from people who think a lot about resource management and environmental legislation, such as the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, the Right Honourable Simon Upton, such as the Environmental Defence Society and many others. So that is to not only include that reference to sustainable management that would solve lots of the problems I've just addressed, but also to constrain this fast-track bill to projects that are going to be helpful to the public infrastructure. Also housing. We acknowledge that there are housing issues in New Zealand. Nobody has an issue with that, and I've been asked what the previous government did about housing, and of course one of the things was a Spatial Planning Act that this government repealed a year ago. Medium density, something that the National Party agreed to and then reneged on.
We haven't reneged on it.
So this, the Minister Heckling will be interested to know that I've also included aquaculture in here. There seems to be a lot of want for aquaculture, but of course I'm very open to other amendments where that may or may not be included. But the point is that for something to benefit from this bill, it should be in the public's interest. There should be a public policy reason for doing it, and it should not be for the private profit of individual companies being allowed to pollute.
Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to deal with a couple of the remarks made by the Hon Rachel Brooking. Firstly, on the purpose clause, clause 3. No, the government won't be adopting her amendment for the simple reason that we are comfortable with the purpose clause as described, but because it does what it says on the tin. The purpose of this Act is to facilitate the delivery of infrastructure and development projects with significant regional or national benefits. That is literally the reason why the fast track bill is before Parliament and why the government is attempting to pass it, Madam Chair. So we are comfortable with the purpose clause and we won't be amending it. On the broader issue about the alleged difference between public infrastructure and private, the opposition seems to be of the view that everything private bad, everything public good. And as I pointed out in my remarks in the debate that we've just had, that ignores the fact that much infrastructure in New Zealand is privately owned. For example, wind farms and hydro stations up and down this country that are owned by Contact Energy, a private company. And it can't be the case that something is okay because it happens to be 51% owned by the government and listed on the stock exchange, and not okay when it happens to be privately owned by a group of investors across New Zealand and Australia. I would also point the House to private housing developments. Now, Rachel Brooking makes the point that we need more housing. Well, most housing in New Zealand is not built by councils or the government. If it was, we would be in some significant trouble. Most housing in New Zealand is built by the private sector. Do they do it for profit? Yes. Do they do it to make money? Yes. Do they do it to provide houses for people? Yes. And so are there public benefits from the provision of widely accessible, affordable housing? Yes, of course there are. But the capital deployed to build that housing is not public capital. And if the solution was Kāinga Ora, then we would have no housing crisis anymore, because under the last government, they had billions upon billions upon billions of debt given to them or allowed to borrow, and billions of dollars of operating subsidies, and the public housing waiting list quadrupled. So it can't be the case that the solution is always public. So it is clearly the case that here's the reality. Here's the reality that seems to have escaped the Labor opposition. We live in a mixed economy. We live in an economy where public and private capital is deployed to create jobs and growth. Clearly the government has a really important role in doing that. Equally, so does the private sector. The projects listed in this bill, and indeed the whole purpose of this bill, is to utilise public and private capital and reduce the red tape that allows that capital to build the type of prosperous New Zealand I think everyone in this House supports. There are public projects on this list. The New Zealand Transport Agency is listed on a range of the roads of national significance projects. There are council projects which are clearly public in nature because they are council projects. There are private sector projects led here. But the point I'm making, Madam Chair, is that it is wrong to try and create a false distinction between something, the ownership of an entity doing a particular thing, and separate that off from the benefits that accrue. Meridian Energy is publicly owned but creates benefits across the economy. Contact Energy is privately owned but creates benefits across the company. Lines companies in the electricity sector have a variety of ownership structures. Vector has some. Wellington Electricity is a privately owned company. Most Wellingtonians probably think it's owned by the council. It's not, thank God. It is in fact owned by a private, foreign-owned company, and they deploy their capital and provide electricity to Wellingtonians. So we live in a mixed economy, is my point. And just the ownership of a particular entity is irrelevant to the issue of benefits that accrue to the economy in a regional and national way, whether or not they're jobs, whether or not they're growth. That is why the government took the position we did on the amendment paper. That is why we're listing the projects in the first place. And this false dichotomy that the opposition seeks to draw between public and private benefit as I've demonstrated through repeated examples, breaks down when you actually apply your mind for more than 5 seconds to the issue at hand.